Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Joe Hill's novel, The Fireman. I'll talk a little bit about my history with the author, go into a no-spoiler brief overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, talk about who I would recommend the book to, and we'll finish it off with what I'll be reading next time. So Joe Hill is a fairly prolific author. He's fairly young. He's probably unfortunately best known for being Stephen King's son, which I feel is kind of a tragedy because he is a solid author in his own right. I've read this novel. I've also read 20th Century Ghost, which is one of his short story collections. I've read Nosferatu and Heart-Shaped Box. My favorite of his work is still probably the first thing I read of his, which is a graphic novel called Lock and Key. I'll kind of talk a little bit about where this fits into kind of my ranking of Joe Hill's work that I've read. He's kind of best known, if you haven't read anything of him before, of being kind of in a similar vein as Stephen King as far as being mostly dealing with horror or the supernatural. So this novel, The Fireman, definitely falls into that category. Kind of a brief overview is there is a main character named Harper who is a school teacher in the Northeast. She's married to a abusive husband, not in the physical sense, but in the emotional and verbal sense. You kind of see his character throughout the book of what he's kind of done to her as far as her self-esteem and her character. What the book is about, though, is the main incident in the book that kicks everything off is there is essentially an event that sparks, no pun intended, a virus called, it's called shorthand, it's called dragon scale. And basically what it does is it causes whoever catches the virus to have rings and other features on their body that looks basically like we would see in fantasy literature would be dragon scale. There also, if you catch this, there's a likelihood that you could spontaneously combust. You can light on fire and you would die. So this, as it would, causes kind of the collapse of society. And the novel really centers around Harper, who near the beginning of the novel learns that she is pregnant, and her wanting to escape her husband and seeking safety at what was once a summer camp that has now kind of been turned into a refugee site, a refuge for those who are living with dragon scale. And you quickly learn that certain members of society have determined that those people with dragon scale should be hunted down and killed. And so this novel really centers around the community that comes from the people who are living with dragon scale and who are managing their condition. So that's all I want to say without getting into spoilers. The novel is kind of a lot more than that. It's really mostly about Harper growing as a character and working to survive to protect herself and her child. Like I said, there are some supernatural elements to it. What I did like about it is the husband and another character become the antagonist of the novel, and both of them are, I think, unique villains in a lot of ways. I think they're kind of yin to each other's yang. I think her husband is a unique villain in the sense that he is not, mustache twirlingly evil. He's just a very cynical person and has a certain view of humanity and view of his relationships and views of himself that are in contrast with the main character. As the novel progresses, he kind of becomes more and more of a certain way, but in the beginning, you kind of see things from his viewpoint, and he strikes you not necessarily as a super evil person, maybe morally, not morally ambiguous, but definitely not, you wouldn't paint him as a super evil person. So kind of watching his progression throughout the novel is interesting. You also have another character who is called the Marlboro Man, who is basically a radio DJ turned hunter, and I thought that character was really one of the most entertaining characters of the novel. And these two kind of become the face of the hunting crews. These are the people who are hunting down those with dragon scale, and I really enjoyed both of them as villains. and I enjoy the action sequences really that come up from them fighting with the main characters. And that to me was kind of the highlight of the novel, is really those action sequences. There's probably 2 or 3 in the book, and there's one towards the middle of the book that's really great. So I thought that was well done, certainly well written. I think Joe Hill, another one of his gifts as a writer, is he really is good at coming up with analogies that you maybe have not heard of before, or have not used as frequently before, but as soon as you hear them, they're spot on, and they really connect with you, the reader. I think he's actually really good at that. So that's really what the novel is about, and one of the things I liked about it. It kind of does center around those characters who become basically a community within a community, and kind of their struggles to survive. And there's a little bit of politicking as far as who should lead them and which way the camp should go. That makes up kind of the bulk of the novel. What I didn't like about the book as much, it is a long book. It was roughly 18 hours or so on audiobook. I think it was an 18 CD audiobook, and as much as I liked certain parts of it, it definitely felt like a little bit of a slog. And I think in that slog there are messages that are well written and well meaning, but I think they do get lost as the story just kind of keeps going and going and going. Towards the end of the book, there is a pretty strong conclusion to it, which I thought was good. There was an interesting little epilogue that kind of shows you where the characters end up. I think that while the main characters especially are well written and they are unique, because you're in a camp setting with I don't know if there's supposed to be 100 people in the camp, but there's a fairly large community. Some of the characters whose names come up, they kind of don't get as much screen time, so it's hard really to get connected to them in a crowd of hundreds of people in the camp. So that was something that I think he could have, because the novel is, and I don't like to compare this to something like The Stand, but they are kind of in the same vein as far as an event has happened, has really destabilized society, and what does the afterwards look like. Because in this world of the firemen, the fire, because it is contagious, has basically raised the wildlife, and so there's smoke constantly in the air. There's questions of where there's habitable land. There's questions of whether or not society will even continue. And so in the sense that The Stand does that too, I think The Stand does a little bit better job of taking a step back and showing you the rest of the world. Whereas this book is very, very much focused on this smaller set of characters, which is, I guess there's pluses and minuses to that. I think I would have liked to have seen maybe a chapter or two from the perspective of the outside world a little bit, just to see what everything else looks like. I'm trying to think of anything else that's kind of note. Overall, like I said, I did like it. It's a little bit difficult for me to recommend this book because it is so long. I think the messages within it are interesting. I think the theme as far as hope versus cynicism and what you would do to survive in a harsh world where you may only have your faith really to protect you, I thought was really handled well. But as far as where I would put this in the rest of the Joe Hill canon that I've read, I would probably put this lower than Nosferatu and lower than Heart-Shaped Box as far as his novels. It's probably my least favorite of the novels that he's written. Lock and Key obviously is probably my favorite thing that he's written, which is a graphic novel. If you haven't read it, I really would highly recommend that. Lock and Key is probably top, then Nosferatu, then Heart-Shaped Box, then probably this, and then after this book, The Fireman, I would probably put 20th Century Ghost, his short story work, because like most short story writers, there's hits and there's misses in that collection. I would recommend that to maybe check out his work to see if you like his voice before moving on to something longer. If you want to just dive into something longer, I really recommend Nosferatu, which is in some ways a vampire novel, but it just, I think the plot and the length of the book kind of fit a little bit better into that, in my opinion, than this. I felt like the plot kind of kept going and going, and maybe we didn't need as much of this book as we did get. So that's really my review of The Fireman. I think if you are a big Joe Hill fan, I think then definitely check this out. There's things to definitely recommend in this that you'll enjoy. So that's the review. Next week I'll be reviewing Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch. I did review one of her novels, The Secret History, before, so I'll be following that up with another one of her novels. If you enjoyed this, please feel free to like the video, comment, subscribe to the channel, and you can always follow me on Twitter as well. Until next time, bye!